Okay, so again, wala lang intro-intro. We proceed sa next topic natin, other percentage taxes. Okay, so again, other percentage tax is one of the uh, internal revenues under the tax code. So again, I remind you these three-way questions para ma-determine natin yung isang transaction. So first, is the transaction subject to tax? Determine natin kasi baka exempted naman yung transaction natin. And then second, ano yung kind of tax and yung tax rate na i-impose. So, sa topic natin, OPT, and then yung rate, depende. And then, alin yung magiging tax base natin for that transaction? Is it gross receipts, gross sales? So, identify natin. So, in every transaction, tanong nyo to sa sarili nyo, itong tatlong tanong natin. Okay? So, sige, next slide tayo. Next slide. So, yung concept and nature ng percentage tax, it is a national tax kasi imposed siya ni national government. One of the internal revenues taxes under Section 21 of the tax code. So, it is a national tax measured by a certain percentage of the gross selling price or gross value in money of goods sold, bartered, or imported, or of the gross receipts or earnings derived by any person engaged in the sale of services. So, nag-a-arise lang naman ang percentage tax if merong sale or nag-render ng services. And then, take note that if a transaction has already been subjected to VAT, hindi na siya pwedeng maging subject sa percentage tax. Okay? And if yung transaction naman na subject na sa percentage tax, hindi na pwedeng ma-subject to VAT. So VAT and yung percentage tax are mutually exclusive na taxes. Pag na-subject na yung isa sa VAT, hindi na pwede ma-subject sa OPT and then vice versa. Okay? Unless the transaction is exempt from business tax. Okay? So next slide. Okay. So tax on persons exempt from value-added tax. Check ko lang kung nagre-record na. Okay, sige. Under Section 116, tax on persons exempt from value-added tax. So, dito sa provision na to, if yung person is exempted from VAT, pwede siyang ma-subject sa 3% percentage tax. So, depende yung tax base natin whether gross quarterly sales or gross quarterly receipts. Okay? So, any person whose sales or receipts are exempt under Section 109 of this code from the payment of the VAT and who is not a VAT-registered person, take note, not a VAT-registered person, shall pay a tax equivalent to 3% of his gross quarterly sales or receipts. Okay, ano ba tong nasa section 109V ng tax code natin? So before itong provision na to, before pa to ng train law. So under the train law, section ano na siya? Section ito. Okay? Section 109, yung victory naging BB na. So yung dating 109V naging section 109BB. So ano ba yung sinasabi sa BB? So, sale or lease of goods or properties or the performance of services other than the transactions mentioned in the preceding paragraph. So, nag-refer na naman ng preceding paragraphs. So, the gross annual sales and or receipts do not exceed the amount of 3 million pesos. So, ito yung sinasabi natin na VAT threshold natin, yung 3 million pesos. So, pag nag-exceed ka dyan sa 3 million na yan, sa sales na 3 million, yung business mo will no longer be subject to OPT but subject to VAT. Okay, so clear tayo dun ha. Pag na-breach yung VAT threshold na 3 million, subject to VAT na, okay? So next ba tayo? Next paragraph. Okay. So next paragraph, dito sa slide, gusto ko lang i-flash yung Ano ba 'to? Yung section 109. So na-mention kasi dito, other than the transactions mentioned in the preceding paragraph. So ano ba yung mga preceding paragraphs na yun? So paragraphs A to paragraph AA. Paragraph A to paragraph AA. So ito yung mga transactions natin na discuss naman natin sa exempt transactions, section 109 A to AA. So next na tayo. So section 117. Section 117. So this refers to the percentage tax on domestic carriers and keepers of garage. Okay, so identify natin yung transaction dito. The transaction natin is yung services provided by domestic carriers and keepers of garage. Now, so yung sa question natin again, if yung transaction ba is subject to tax, yung first question natin. So the answer is yes. Okay? So second question natin, anong kind of tax and yung rate siya masasubject. So in this case, subject to percentage tax and yung rate is 3%. And then yung third question natin is yung tax base naman. So nasagot na yung question natin, which is yung gross quarterly, quarterly gross receipts. So transaction natin is the sale of services ng domestic carriers and keepers of garage. Yung kind of tax is percentage tax. The tax rate is 3%. And then yung tax base natin ito, quarterly gross receipts. Okay? So, cars for rent or hire driven by the lessee, transportation contractors, including persons who transport passengers for hire and other domestic carriers by land. Okay? For the transport of passengers shall pay a tax equivalent to 3% of their quarterly gross receipts. Okay? So next transaction tayo. Ito. Sir, parang yung section 118, parang almost the same provision lang. Okay? So parang ano lang, parang magkapares nga, but sa letter A, international, ito, air carriers doing business in the Philippines. On the other hand, sa letter B, international shipping carrier. So ito, by means of air, by means of sea or any body of water. Okay? So yung transaction natin, percentage tax on international carriers. So international air carriers doing business in the Philippines on their gross receipts. So ito yung magiging base natin. Gross receipts. Okay? So doing business in the Philippines on their gross receipts derived from transport of cargo. So ito yung transaction natin. Transport of cargo from the Philippines to another country. Yung transaction natin is transport of cargo from the Philippines to another country by means of international air carrier. So ang tax niya is 3% no quarterly gross receipts. Okay? Same way na yung international shipping carriers doing business in the Philippines on their gross receipts derived from transport of cargo from the Philippines to another country shall pay a tax equivalent to 3% of their gross receipts. Kindly take note then na yung transport of cargo is from the Philippines to another country. Okay? So next transaction tayo. Ito, summarize lang. If si international carrier for goods or cargoes, outgoing is 3% OPT. So ito yung nasa section 118 ng tax code natin. Itong hina-highlight ko. Section 118 of the tax code. On the other hand, international carrier of passengers, whether outgoing or incoming, exempt from business tax. Okay? Next tayo. So, section 119. Okay. Sige. Yung tax on franchises naman. Okay? So, any provision of general or special law. Again, ang franchise kasi, like yung sa ABS-CBN, di ba? Nag-expire na yung franchise nila last May 2020 nga ba yun? Tama, tama. May 2020. Now, it is within the province or the power of the Congress to enact a law para buhayin ulit yung franchise ni ABS-CBN. So, it is under the Constitution. It is only the Congress who can create a law for the franchise of any television broadcasting companies. Okay, so, but unfortunately, yung ABS-CBN, hindi sila nakapag-renew ng franchise nila. So, medyo ano rin, medyo political yung issue doon sa grant ng franchise nila. Okay? So, any provision of general or special law to the contrary notwithstanding, there shall be levied, assessed, and collected in respect to all franchises on radio and or television broadcasting companies whose annual gross receipts of the preceding year do not exceed 10 million pesos. Okay? So pag hindi daw nag-exceed ng 10 million pesos, subject yung transaction sa subject si radio or television broadcasting company sa 3% na percentage tax. Okay? Pag gas and water utilities naman, tax of 2% on the gross receipts derived from the business covered by the law granting the franchise. Okay? So, provided, however, that radio and television broadcasting companies referred to in this section shall have an option to be registered as a VAT taxpayer and pay the tax due thereon. So, even if hindi na breach ni television or ni radio broadcasting company yung 10 million na threshold, it may opt to pay the VAT provided na mag-register siya. So, option to be registered as a VAT taxpayer and pay the tax due thereon. So, once the option is exercised, said option shall be irrevocable. Okay? Section, may next ba? Sige. Next, Section 120. Tax on overseas dispatch, message or conversation originating from the Philippines. Okay. So the transaction is overseas dispatch, message or conversation from the Philippines. So there shall be collected upon every overseas dispatch, message or conversation transmitted from the Philippines by telephone, telegraph, telewriter exchange, wireless and other communication equipment services a tax of 10% on the amount paid for the services. Okay? So 10% yung tax rate natin and then yung tax base natin is yung amount paid for such services. Ano ba yung transaction natin again? Overseas dispatch, message or conversation transmitted from the Philippines by telephone, telegraph, telewriter exchange. May ganito pa ba? Telewriter. Parang wala na no? Wireless and other communication equipment services. So, 10%. Okay? So, you don't need to memorize the tax rates naman dito. Just be familiar with it. Or, mas madali dito, i-correlate mo siya sa tawag dito. Correlate mo siya sa mga bagay-bagay. Like ito. Overseas dispatch, message, or conversation. So, ang naisip mo dyan is PLDT, diba? Halimbawa lang. Kasi, communication. So, either PLDT, Globe, or kung ano man. Kung anumang network tayo. So, PLDT. So, nakita mo yung T, 10%. Diba? Mga ganun lang. Study smart, pero di ko naman kayo nire-require na i-memorize yung tax rate. Okay? And then, yung last provision is, yung ano lang, time of payment lang naman siya. 20 days after the end of each quarter. So, quarterly din ang magbayad ng tax on overseas dispatch. Okay? So, alam ko may mga exempted dito eh. Marami exemptions to. Like ito. Number 1, the government. Syempre, lagi naman. So, amounts paid for messages transmitted by the government of the Republic of the Philippines or any of its political subdivisions, or instrumentality. So, kasama dyan yung mga local government units. So, number one exemption natin is government. Next, diplomatic services. Amounts paid for messages transmitted by any embassy and consular offices of a foreign government. So next, international organizations, and then yung last natin, news services. Exempted din sila from payment of this dispatch message or conversation originating from the Philippines. So, hindi sila liable sa percentage tax. Again, number one, government. Number two, diplomatic services, international organizations, and news services. Okay? Ito naman, ang daming tax rate natin. Section 121. Tax on banks and non-bank financial intermediaries performing quasi-banking functions. So, there shall be collected a tax on gross receipts. Ito yung tax base natin. Gross receipts derived from sources within the Philippines by all banks and non-bank financial intermediaries. So, yung taxpayer natin, si bank and non-bank financial intermediary. So, ano yung transaction natin? Okay? So, on interest, commission, and discounts from lending activities. If the maturity period is 5 years or less, 5%. So 5 years or less, 5%. Maturity period is more than 5 years, subject to 1%. Okay? So saan yan yung tax dito is on the interest, commission, and discounts from lending activities. So percentage tax depending on the maturity period. So dito 5% kapag yung maturity period is 5 years or less. Pag more than 5 years, 1% lang. So letter B, on dividends and equity shares and net income of subsidiaries, 0%. Letter C, on royalties, rentals of property, real or personal, profits from exchange and all other items treated as gross income. So 7% naman yung tax natin. So on net trading gains within the taxable year on foreign currency, debt securities, derivatives, and other similar instruments, 7%. Okay? So again, hindi ko kayo re-require memorize to, considering then na may tatanong naman sa board exam around 2.85% out of 70 items. So merong dalawang itatanong regarding percentage tax. And kung ako siguro yung examiner, ang itatanong ko is about yung sa breach sa VAT threshold. Okay? So siguro kung ako ang examiner nyo, ang itatanong ko about section 109 BB. So itetest ko yung knowledge nyo about the VAT threshold. Okay? So balik tayo section, ito maganda rin itanong to section 118. So possible candidates for board exam. So section 121, okay? Tapos na tayo dito Number 122, section 122, tax on other non-bank financial intermediaries. Okay? So there shall be a tax collected, a tax of 5% on gross receipts naman derived by other non-bank financial intermediaries doing business in the Philippines. So in transaction natin again, interest, commissions, discounts, and all other items treated as gross income under this code. So interest, commissions, and discount from lending activities as well as income from financial leasing shall be taxed on the basis of remaining maturities of the instruments from which such receipts are derived. Ang haba ng provision natin. So in accordance with the following schedule, if the maturity period is 5 years or less, 5%. Maturity period is more than 5 years, 1% lang. Okay? So ang pinagkaiba niya dito sa section 121? So dito kasi, banks and non-bank financial intermediaries performing quasi-banking functions. So yung banking function, so example yung sa BDO and BPI, yung mga regular transactions like deposit, loans, ganyan. Sa section 1 to 2 naman, other non-bank financial intermediaries. Okay? Section 125, amusement taxes. Okay? So there shall be collected. Okay. So yung taxpayer natin dito is the lessee or operator of cockpits, cabarets, night or day clubs, boxing exhibitions, professional basketball games, high ally and racetracks. So yung amusement taxes depende kung ano yung transaction natin. So magko-collect daw si government from the proprietor ng amusement tax. So 18% in the case of cockpits. So 18% in the case of cabarets, night or day club. Sa ano to? China-charge to sa parang entrance fee. Pag ako pumasok ng ano, uh, let's say ng cockpit or ng cabaret, parang may tax on the entrance fee of about 18%. Tataka kayo, ang laki ng ano, no? Ang laki ng tax. So, ito yung exercise nung power of taxation as a means to exercise yung police power, because these activities are discouraged, like yung cockpits. Ano bang meron dyan? Sabong, di ba? Wala naman yung ano eh, may ambag ba yan sa ano economy natin. So yung mga ganyan activities dinidiscourage ni power of taxation, and as a means to implement yung police power, tinataasan ni tax code yung tax rate para ma-discourage yung mga ganyang activities. Okay? Again, uh, letter C, 10% in the case of boxing exhibitions. Okay? Boxing exhibitions wherein world or oriental championships in any division is at stake. Exempt yan from amusement tax. So, mga laban ni Manny Pacquiao kapag world champion, di ba? So, subject ba yun sa amusement tax? Pero parang hindi pa naman lumaban si Pacquiao dito, no? Ng title niya, world, ng world championship niya. Parang hindi pa, no? Okay? So, letter D, 15% naman in the case of ito, PBA, yan. Professional Basketball Games. Okay? So, yung tax therein shall be in lieu of all other percentage taxes of whatever nature and description. So, 15% kapag professional basketball games. Okay? Iniisip ko kung paano i-relate yung 15% sa ano, sa professional basketball games. Parang wala naman akong kilalang ano, basketball player na may jersey number na 15. Doon sana natin siya i-correlate eh. Okay? So, imagine niyo na lang, meron kayong jersey, basketball jersey. And then yung nakalagay sa likod, yung jersey number is 15, di ba? So, pag tinanong sa board, magkano yung tax sa ano, professional basketball games. So, isipin niyo yung jersey, suot nyo. And then yung tax rate is yung jersey number na nakalagay sa likod, which is 15%. Okay? So, letter E naman tayo. 30% in the case of high ally and racetracks of their gross receipts. Okay? Hindi ko alam kung may ganyan pa ngayon. High ally. Alam ko racetracks meron pa. Like yung dito dati sa Makati, sa may PRC, Philippine Racing Commission. May mga racetrack dyan eh. Pero dati parang lipat na somewhere sa Cavite. Okay, so ang tax natin dun is 30%. Again, ang tax base is yung amount collected. Okay? So yung amount collected. So irrespective of whether or not any amount is charged for admission. So next na tayo tax on winnings. Okay, so ba to? I'll be honest with you tax on winnings, siguro sa ano, mga nangangarera. Sa mga karera ng kabayo, yan. Horse racing. So, okay. So, may tax pala doon. So, siguro pag tumaya ka sa ano, sa kabayo, and then yung winnings mo, subject yun sa percentage tax. So there shall pay a tax equivalent to 10% of his winnings or dividends. So taxable pala yung ano, yung mga pinapanalo ng mga ano, nagkakarera. So karera ng kabayo yung ano, usapan dito. Okay? So 10% of his winnings or dividends. So provided that in the case of winnings from double, forecast, quinela, and trifecta bets shall be 4%. Parang tatanong ba to? Tatanong ba to sa ano, sa exam? So in the case of owners of winning race horses, yan, yung mga horse owners naman, there shall be a tax of 10% of the prices. Okay? So yung mananalong kabayo din pala, may premyo din pala doon sa horse owner. And then yung winnings ni horse owner subject din sa 10% tax. Yung 4% refers to siguro yung mga bet to. Modes of betting yan, double, forecast, quinela, and trifecta. Okay? So move on na tayo ah. Next na tayo. Ito, pwedeng candidate to sa ano, itanong sa hmm, sa board exam. So section 127, tax on sale, yung transaction na sale, barter, or exchange of shares of stock listed and traded through the local stock exchange or through initial public offering. Okay? So the transaction is a sale, barter, or exchange of shares of stock na nasa PSE or yung local stock exchange natin. So there shall be levied, assessed, and collected on every sale, barter, exchange, or other dispositions of shares of stock listed and traded through the local stock exchange other than the sale by a dealer in securities. Okay? So yung transaction natin, sale, barter, or exchange of shares of stock through the local stock exchange. So exclude na natin si other than the sale by a dealer in securities. Hindi siya subject dito sa ano, sa tax natin kapag if yung sale was made by a dealer in securities. So ang tax rate natin is 6/10 of 1%. So kung i-translate natin siya 6/10 of 1%, sa calculator niya ang ilagay niya is 0.006. Tama 'di ba? 6/10 of 1%. Kasi kung dito yung 6 natin, 60%, 'di ba? Dito 60%. Kung dito natin ilalagay yung 6% naman. So dito 6/10 of 1%. So ito yung gagamitin nyo na multiplier. Okay? Ano yung tax base naman natin? Knowing na yung tax rate pala natin is 6/10 of 1%. Yan, gross selling price or gross value in money of the shares of stock sold, bartered, exchanged, or otherwise disposed. Okay? Shall be paid by the seller or transferor. So yung taxpayer pala natin dito is the seller or the transferor. Alam ko may example ako dito eh. Okay? Ito. So, so ito yung transaction natin. So, in accordance with your instructions, ito yung sinabi ng broker ko. Ito yung in-email sa akin ng broker ko. Bumili ako ng Ayala Corporation, Energy Corporation. So, it is the energy arm naman ni Ayala. 'Di ba? Meron tayo yung Makati Development Corporation, which is the construction arm ni Ayala, and then meron tayong ALI, yung Ayala Land, which is the real estate naman ni Ayala. Communication, si Globe, 'di ba? Ayala din yung Globe. Okay? So, I bought 9,300 shares of AC Energy at the price of 7.13. Okay? So magkano yung tawag dito? Magkano yung stock transaction tax natin? Okay? Magkano yung stock transaction tax natin? So 93 times 7.13 is ito, 66,309. So magkano yung ano niyan, yung stock transaction tax? Okay? So ito yung fees na binayaran ko. When you buy a stock in PSE, meron kasing commission ng broker. And then yung commission nila is subject to that. So magkano yung binayad ko na stock transaction tax dito? Okay? So the answer is eto, zero. Wala pa akong binabayaran na stock transaction tax. Remember, buyer ako dito sa transaction na to. And then yung tax na ini-impose natin is against the seller. Okay? So halimbawa naman, so dito sa transaction natin, uh, hindi pa subject yun sa stock transaction tax. Pero si seller, malamang may binayaran siya na stocks. Okay? Na stock transaction tax. Now, if ibenta ko to si ASEN, will my transaction be subject to stock transaction tax? So the answer is yes. Okay? So ano yung magiging tax base natin doon? Again yung gross selling price or gross value in money. So halimbawa ibenta ko rin siya at this price, 7.13 times 9,300. Ito yung kukumputan natin ng 6/10 of 1%. Okay? Okay? Sana clear tayo doon. Okay? Okay. Shares of stock naman sold and or exchanged through initial public offering. Okay. There shall be levied, assessed, and collected on every sale, barter exchange, or other disposition through initial public offering of shares of stock in closely held corporations. So, ang in-IPO dito or yung initial public offering is the closely held corporation. So, what are those closely held corporations? Corporations which are owned by not more than 20 nung family stockholders nung corporation. So not more than 20. So a tax at the rates provided here under based on the gross selling price. Okay? Or gross value in money of the shares of stock sold, bartered, or exchanged. Okay? So magkano yung tax niya? Okay? So depende kung magkano yung total outstanding shares na ililist dun sa stock exchange. So if up to 25% nung total outstanding shares, the tax is 4%. Pag over 25 but not over 33 and 1/3%, 2%. Over 33 and 1/3%, 1% naman yung OPT natin, yung other percentage tax. So remember, applicable lang to uh, sa isang corporation na closely held corporation. Okay? Again, yung transaction natin, initial public offering of shares of stock in closely held corporations. Okay, so next tayo. Wala na ba? Okay. Sige. For last two items natin, okay, returns of gross sales, receipts or earnings, and payment of tax. So who are those persons liable to pay percentage tax? So every person subject to the percentage tax is imposed. So under doon, section 100, under OPT, shall file a quarterly return. Saan yung highlighter? Pen, di ba? Quarterly return of the amount of his gross sales and pay the tax due thereon within 25 days after the end of each taxable quarter. Okay, so 25 days after the end of each taxable quarter. So, if yung taxable quarter natin is January to March, kailan natin babayaran? January to March yung taxable quarter natin. So, pay the tax on or before April 25. Okay? So, if April 25 falls on a holiday or on a weekend, say Saturday or Sunday, the next working day tayo. Okay? Next working day. So next, so where do we file? Where do we file yung tax return natin? So file a separate return for each branch or a consolidated return for all branches or places of business with the authorized agent bank or yung tinatawag natin na AAB. Okay? So bayad ng tax sa isang AAB. So punta ka lang naman ng bangko kapag merong babayaran. Pwede rin naman sa Revenue District Officer or collection agent or duly authorized treasurer of the city or municipality where said business or principal place of business is located. Pero usually sa ano na lang to, mas madaling magbayad sa authorized agent bank. Okay? Okay, so I think that's it for other percentage tax. So up next is yung uh, sagutan natin yung exercise on your book. Parang chapter, ano ata to? Chapter 5. Okay? So, thank you and thank you for watching.